All right, hello and welcome. My name is Rochelle Williams. I'm the Aquatics and Youth Programs Coordinator at Western Washington University, and welcome to episode 2 of Rec Chats Elevate Your Path. We are starting this Past President series, and we are super excited to have Stan Shingles. Stan was the NERSA president from 2015 to 2016 and is currently the interim vice president and chief diversity officer at Central Michigan University. Thanks so much for being with us today, Stan.
Rochelle, thank you so much for having me. It's always good to see you and certainly glad to be with you.
Great, thank you. Could you start us off by just telling us how you got into campus recreation?
Well, I actually in college at Illinois State University, I was a recreation and parks administration major, and my goal was to work in community recreation. I was going to go back to Chicago, where I'm originally from, and work in the Chicago Park District, which is one of the biggest recreation service providers in the whole entire country. And I thought that's what I wanted to do when I landed on majoring in Parks and Recreation. Only knew about campus recreation through being a captain and manager for my intramural sports teams. Didn't really know that there was a profession. It was really interesting. I never worked as an undergraduate, as an official, as a supervisor. We didn't have a rec center. We had a field house. But I did start to officiate at the grade school and high school level when I was a undergraduate student. So I lived in the community where I went to college. And after 5 years of working in community recreation, it was always something that kept me connected to campus. I was always back on campus. I was always, in our, whether it was in the academic area, visiting former professors, or whether it was on campus, playing pickup basketball or whatever it may have been. And I decided, as I started to kind of look at a little bit about what career options were, campus recreation certainly emerged as something I might be interested in doing.
Awesome. I think that that resonates with a lot of us who didn't even realize campus recreation was a thing we could do. What year was your first year as a member of NERSA?
Boy, that was a long time ago, and this is going to date me. I became a member when I became a graduate assistant in 1987-88 was my very, very first year as a member.
Awesome. Could you talk to us a little bit about your graduate assistantship?
Yeah, I was a graduate assistant. As I mentioned, I began my career in community recreation. I worked for 5 years and I started working in a youth center providing recreation programs. It was community-based programs. And then I went to a community center where I opened a brand new community center. I was able to set up all the programs. And then as I started to look at the big picture of what might happen, I didn't see a lot of future. So I literally quit a full-time job in August of 1987. And I knew the intramural sports coordinator at Illinois State, or actually the assistant director for intramural sports. And I picked up the phone, I called him, and I said, thinking about grad school full-time, do you have any assistantships open? And he said, yeah, I actually have 2 in intramural sports. Who's interested? And I said, I am. And it came as a surprise to him. And I talked with him about it. And he said, because I already knew him, this was probably a little bit different than the time today. Didn't even have to interview because we had a relationship. And 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my first graduate class full time. And I was also the intramural sports graduate assistant.
Yeah, I don't know that it works quite like that right now, but that does sound like a much less stressful process than I think.
Yeah, no question.
So you quit your full-time job, you had 5 years of experience, and then you went back to grad school and did your 2-year GA program. Throughout those experiences, what else did you go through personally and professionally to feel like you were qualified to serve as NERSA president when you had applied?
Well, Rochelle, I had a professor to tell me, actually it was one of my professors at Illinois State University, who was actually instrumental in starting the Disney College program, along with a person who is actually on the faculty here today at CMU, Dean Wallen, who actually, the two of them helped Disney to start the college program. And Dr. Milt Weisbecker, who's one of my professors, he always talked about experience. And I still carry that with me today. So I always invested in a variety of experiences. And as I think about what experiences helped me to become NERSA president, I think it was a slow and steady climb. I think as my very first NERSA conference, excuse me, my very first experience in collegiate recreation from a professional development standpoint was at the Illinois State Workshop in 1987, which we hosted at Illinois State. And I just remember as we were going through the planning process as a GA, everybody kept talking about Tony. Tony, Tony, Tony. I had no idea who they were talking about. Well, they were talking about Tony Clemens, and Tony was the longtime director at the University of Illinois. Tony was actually at that time NERSA's president-elect. So when I went to that first conference in October of 1987, I met Tony Clemens, a person who today is a honor award winner in NERSA, now deceased. But Tony is one of those big personality and he's never met a stranger. When he walked into the room, I just remember, Tony is Black as I am. And I remember just saying, wow, this is interesting. And then, you start hearing about this NERSA president thing. Didn't know what any of that meant. But I just remember thinking, if Tony can do that, why can't I? And so that slow and steady climb that I mentioned where, I served in mostly what I would consider at that time traditional roles. I served on all of NERSA's board of directors, the Services Corporation. I served on the parent board in our previous model where we had regional vice presidents. So I was elected the Region 3 vice president, but I also was the state director for Michigan and was actually the state director when we decided as a state to start a state association. So I was instrumental in starting what became MRSA, the Michigan Intramural Recreational Sports Association, and then being on committees and task force and really understanding the opportunity to serve and how this continuous service, starts to elevate your path, as you mentioned earlier, because you start to build a network, you start to understand the inner workings of the association, and ultimately, if your goal is to be the president, then that slow and steady climb is something that I know it worked very, very effectively for me.
Yeah, and I can't remember exactly when you said it, but at one point you've said, which I know I've heard you say it multiple times, it's not what you know or who you know, it's who knows you.
Yeah.
And I heard that really early in my NERSA career, and I've taken that to heart. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's that slow and steady climb is definitely I think it is the way. If anyone watches The Mandalorian, that's
well to that point in 1987. Just to give you a good illustration, I talked about meeting Tony Clemens. I also met Mike Dunn at that Illinois State Conference, and I met one of my dearest friends in this association to this day, Mo McGonigal. Mo was a graduate assistant at University of Illinois. I was at Illinois State, and so I've known Mo my entire career in collegiate recreation, maybe less than 2 months, because August and September. I met her in October. And so I think we have very similar approaches that we took in terms of engaging ourselves and doing that slow and steady climb that I mentioned.
Yeah, and just as a young professional, it's always really cool to see all of y'all who have accomplished so much in the association and hear that y'all have been friends for like 30 years.
30 years, that's a long time.
Great. That's the dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. So after you had your long and steady ascent, at what point did you decide to apply for NERSA president? And then what were some factors, if you had any, that helped you decide that that was a good time to apply?
Well, it starts with one of the reasons I came to Central Michigan University is I mentioned Mike Dunn, and Mike was the director at Southern Illinois University at that time, not at Ohio State, where he retired from. And I had an opportunity when I got my first professional position at Northern Illinois to meet Dr. Tom Jones, who was the director here at CMU. And the very next year, Dr. Jones had a position open here, and several people said, you should apply. That would be a good place, especially as I started talking about some of my aspirations at that time. A young professional, I'm thinking I'm on some track. At that time, you're exploring and working for leaders who basically inspire and support and motivate it was something that I took to, and I just decided at that time, coming to CMU would be a good opportunity for me to serve kind of an apprenticeship, if you will, under a former NERSA director, which Dr. Jones was the director in 1985, 86. So it was prior to me becoming a member, but I felt like that was important. And at that time, I felt, like I can do this, but it needed to be a lot of steps in the ladder, if you will, before I could get to that point. But ultimately, you feel like you've checked the boxes, you've done the work, you understand the organization, and more importantly, you're committed to trying to help move the organization forward. And that's what motivated me to move forward.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
How has NERSA changed since you've joined?
Well, it's grown tremendously. It was really focused at one time on sport at many levels, and then in my early time, we started to shift a little bit to incorporating more fitness. But today, to see the association and the profession focus on well-being, where we're not just talking about participation in sport, participation in fitness, but we're talking about developing people on multiple levels. And I think our ability to partner across campus is extremely important, especially considering the resources and the assets that we have. And I think today, when I look at NERSA, it's no longer the ma and pa business. It's matured like all of us have. I'm not the same person that I was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I was an assistant director. Today, I'm a vice president. And so NERSA has gone through its growth as well, grown into a association that I think meets very different needs of its members than it did maybe even 20 years ago, because I think the intentional nature of what NERSA puts in place for the serving of its members and the development of its members is, in my opinion, what makes it unique as a professional association. So a lot of things have changed, and certainly a lot of things have gotten better.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What has been your favorite committee or position that you've held or served on in NERSA?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if I have a favorite, but what I know I have are favorite memories of serving with some of the most dedicated, passionate, and committed members. That's what you remember. You remember those moments when you you went into something as together as a group, whether it's serving on a committee, whether it was developing a presentation or whatever it's been. And it was just an idea, it's just a concept. And to see it from the beginning, the middle, and then to that implementation stage, I think those are some of the most rewarding experiences that I've had. So I don't know if it's, I think if I had to put my finger on it and name one, and of course, all of my other friends and colleagues who have served in these other places are gonna tar and feather me for this, but I really enjoyed my time on the faculty for the School of Collegiate Recreation. That was my opportunity to take experiences and knowledge that I had and now be able to provide that for others. So I remember going to the school a whole lot of years ago and coming back to campus and going into Dr. Jones's office and saying, that's the best professional development experience I've ever had. And I said, and someday I want to be on the faculty. And lo and behold, 3 years later, I was on the faculty and really enjoyed that. I have teaching I think it's in my DNA. My mother was a teacher. My wife's a professor. And so the ability to take that knowledge and experiences that you have and share it with others, that made for a pretty amazing experience.
Well, and as somebody who I've been fortunate enough to go through the school like that, I completely agree that it has been the most useful and profoundly changing experience that I've ever been through personally or professionally. So we appreciate all of y'all that have been willing to be on the faculty and provide those opportunities for
Well,
us.
here's the interesting thing. When I went to the faculty in 1994, there are 8 individuals that went to the school with me at that time who were presidents of NERSA. So it was we always say it was a star-studded class. I don't know if that's what it was, but it was some pretty, neat people. And one of those individuals was Mo McGonigal. We went to the school, together, and just learned a lot, and just really developed some meaningful relationships. That's what those cohorts are about, because we can talk about the time you're together in that setting, but it's what happens afterwards and the relationships that you're able to maintain over a period of time. And some pretty neat people were a part of that experience.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And then finally, do you have any advice for members that are interested in becoming NERSA president one day?
It's interesting. I always tell people that, I don't know if I like to give advice. I do have opinions about everything, but I like to give people options and opportunities, Rochelle. And I think, when we talk about, that interest in becoming NERSA president, I would say, if that's something you're interested in, be prepared to serve the very best way that you can. The president's position is just one position, but it's certainly, and it's certainly an important one. But don't let that be your only focus. I don't see it as a holy grail. I see it as a opportunity, because we have other significant leadership roles as well. And there's one person that's the president, 3 in the track at the same time. So, and not everybody is interested in being the president. And if it's what you want to pursue, then be, committed, be prepared to serve, and be, ready to make the best impact that you can possibly make.
Great. Thank you so much, Stan. I really appreciate you taking the time to hop on here and share some of your insights and your experiences. For everyone that's tuning in, make sure that you tune in next Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Make sure you follow us on RecChat or at RecChat on Instagram. We're on TikTok now. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on Twitter. Stan, do you have any last plugs before we go?
Well, I guess I would just always say, stay engaged, continue to advocate for our profession in the best way that you can, and serve, because our association needs great leaders. I'm really excited about the new leaders that we have that are poised to serve this association for years to come.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. And thanks so much, everybody, for watching today.